What's happening, my fellow culinary enthusiasts? I'm Josh with Emerald Coast Chefs, and today we're going to be talking all about knives. By far, one of the most common questions I get across all social media platforms, maybe with the exception of questions about what type of cookware I use, is questions about what type of knives I use. So today I'm going to give you my best tips on keeping your knives sharp, as well as talk a little bit about different types of knives and different uses, and finish up with what I think is probably the best value for most people and what they're looking for. So stick around, you don't want to miss this. I haven't even unrolled the knife bag, so don't cut us off yet. So I want to start off by saying that a lot of things that we're going to discuss today are going to be very factual things, but we're also going to talk about a lot of things that honestly are just very subjective, right? So I get asked a lot about what type of steel is best or what type of handle is best. And I just want to point out that we literally have handwriting experts that can analyze and determine a person's handwriting compared against literally hundreds of thousands or even millions of other people, right? So it's kind of silly to think that we're all going to have the exact same experience. We all have different size hands. We all use our muscles and our skeletal systems in a little bit different way. So a lot of the things as far as what works best for you is going to be things that you're going to find through experience, not on the YouTube. So I just want to get that out there in all honesty and say that up front. Now, in a perfect world, I would carry a block set with a whole bunch of knives like this. I hear chefs say, oh, you only need 3 knives. And I hear this guy say, oh, I think, you need all of these sets for all these different specialties. Look, it doesn't matter if you interview 4 different Michelin star chefs, they're going to tell you 4 different things. So again, this is my opinion on this. And if you see this and come to a different conclusion, that's not me saying that you're wrong. I'm just sharing my thoughts and opinions on this after 25 years in the culinary industry and being a private chef and owning this company for about 5 years now. So since it's impractical for me to carry one of these around as a private chef on the daily, let's go ahead and take a look inside this guy and see what I condense that down into so that I can be a little more effective, but still have a good range of options to choose from. So over the years, I've used quite a lot of different manufacturers, and I would say at this point in time, I don't have any one manufacturer that I'm any more married to than another as far as when you look at the major, say, top 4 or 5 people in the industry making Western knives. By the way, that's what we're talking about today, Western knives. We're not going to talk about Japanese carbon steel. But there are pros and cons to each, as well as varying types of steel and hardnesses. So I'll tell you a little bit about those. So starting off, first thing that I have here is a 6-inch boning knife. This one's made from a company, Mercer. Mercer is located in Solingen, Germany, known as the City of Blades there. This is a Cremova steel. It is a stainless steel. And you'll see this blade has a little flex to it. It's a thin blade, but I use this for trimming up beef tenderloins a lot. I use it for taking bones out of like the leg of lamb, removing bones out of chicken thighs, things like that. So good boning knife there. A good quality bread knife. This one is made by Global. A bread knife is essential, but I just want to point out that these are good for a lot more than bread. So these are really good. I always recommend a serrated blade, typically for like slicing tomatoes. They're also really nice for slicing citrus, slicing cucumbers, or slicing like large seeded vegetables as well. So those are things that I use a serrated bread knife for. The current honing steel that I have in here is a ceramic steel from Messmeister. The reason is the Global knives actually have a softer steel, which allows them to get slightly sharp, but the steel is not as hard, so it doesn't stay sharp for quite as long. Global recommends that you do not use a traditional German steel honing rod. The finer grit seems to work just as well on the other knives. This is a 6-inch chef knife. Sometimes we also refer to this as a petty knife. I use this just for doing smaller things that maybe I don't want to use my full-size chef knife for. So a lot of times If I'm cutting shallots, if I'm just cutting a bunch of chives or some scallions, something like that. Not something I'm going to grab if I'm going to cut like a very large, big pile of herbs on a cutting board or something. But just for those small, kind of minute things that it's a little more comfortable to use a 6-inch knife. This knife was given to me. This was made by a custom knife maker out of Georgia. Unfortunately, I do not know the name of the person who made it. Or exactly what type of steel it is, but I suspect it is some form of a powdered Swedish steel. Guessing the Rockwell hardness based on my experience is probably somewhere around pretty close to 60. I would say 59 or 60 on this guy. I use this for splitting oyster shells. As well as cutting through some of the bones, the collarbones and such on chickens, things like that. I've got this little Global paring knife. A paring knife, if I'm being honest, I don't use a lot. There's just a few things. If I'm cutting maybe apples for apple pie or things like that, that I grab a paring knife for. I know people that use a paring knife all the time. It really, again, is a matter of preference when it comes to certain things. But typically when I'm using a paring knife, I'm holding it very high up on the blade because I'm specifically using a paring knife because I want those fine motor skills. So it's not a knife that I'm typically going to use for like slicing an onion or something like that. But if it works for you, feel free to do that. I keep the 6-inch serrated utility knife. This is probably my go-to knife for cutting tomatoes. Sometimes if you're cutting those big heirlooms, this isn't quite long enough and you'll want to use that serrated bread knife. But the little utility knife here works really well for, I use grape tomatoes a lot, as well as slicing English cucumbers, working with slicing citrus, things like that. The main probably go-to chef knife that I use for vegetables. So this is what I'm going to use for if I'm going to julienne onions, almost all vegetables that I'm doing any type of medium to large dice cut with or anything like that. I'm going to use this Global chef knife currently. This steel, as I mentioned, is Global was kind of an innovative company. They were using a little bit softer Japanese steel. And so it could get sharper than most of the Western knives. And so they took some of the Japanese ideologies surrounding what they had done with, the custom made carbon steels and brought that into the Western knife world. It looks like that this is just one solid piece of steel. And again, really cool the way that they did that. But this is actually an invisible weld right here where the handle and the blade meet. And this is a hollow handle that Global fills with sand. And then they put these little texture dots on it. So even when this knife is wet, I still get a really firm grip on it. And over the years, I have found that the longer I have gone on through my career, and keep in mind, I spend 2 to 4 hours a day standing chopping with a chef knife in my hand and have done that for a couple of decades now. Even longer hours a day back when I was a line cooker earlier in my career, I spent more time prepping even before I would go onto the line to cook. So point being, I have valued a lighter knife more and more and more the older I get, the longer I go into my career. And I'm not looking for something super heavy or heavier like maybe the Wusthof Classic Icon or something like that. Great home block set, just not what I want to carry every day as a private chef working, traveling around. So then this knife here is a Miyabi Mizuyu. Miyabi, these are handmade in Japan. The detail on this knife is incredible. Kind of the wording has come off the blade a little bit, but that's about it. The handle is made from micarta, which is a composite substance. If you're familiar with G10, it's very similar to G10. It's maybe even a little smoother, but still just as grippy. So really nice material. You can see it's what we call the D shape here. So it's almost kind of a slight triangle shape that it holds in the hand with the hammered steel. This is SG2 steel. It has a Rockwell hardness of about 62. And I use this predominantly for fish. I don't really use it for chopping vegetables and stuff like that. I try to keep the blade use just for mainly fish flesh and slicing. And this blade has done extremely well holding up, as well as I would say if I just had to pick one chef's knife that just feels phenomenal in the hand, it's probably this knife right here from Miyabi. I mean, every part of the balance of this knife it just sits in the hand, moves really smoothly, really well. So really recommend that knife. And then lastly, I keep this big global heavyweight knife. This is, I think, 11 3/4 inches, but it's considerably heavier than the others. They pack a little bit more steel on here, and I use this for a variety of things. I don't use it a lot. It's a little less common for others, but something like slicing a large prime rib, it's excellent for that. Sometimes I'll be portioning maybe a really large side of salmon, or the black grouper that we have here in the Gulf can get really large. So sometimes I have those really large fillets that I want to use this for. But even though it is, quote, the heavyweight knife, keep in mind it's still that kind of softer steel. So at the end of the day, I don't use this in the same manner that I would use a cleaver or something like that, which you don't see a cleaver in here because I am not doing full-scale butchering in most cases in my clients' homes for their private chef events. All right, so taking a look now at a couple of the block sets I have, we'll talk a little bit about what, I would love to have in a perfect world if I could carry this around with me all the time, what I use here at home, but I just don't necessarily carry it in my knife bag every single day. So a couple of the things that I do bring along with me. Here on the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of my clients are out on fishing charters, and so I'm working with their personal fish. Anytime I typically cut fish, my preferred knife, honestly, with that is the Bubba blade. It's not an expensive knife. It's a high carbon stainless steel. It's got a titanium nitride coating on it, but it's a very good blade. It holds an edge. I know some people hate this, so I don't know what to tell you other than to try it, but I love the Bubba blades, and I've tried using very, very, very expensive knives when it comes to breaking down whole fish. And I feel pretty strongly that the fish that I work with the most when we're looking at red snapper, when we're looking at grouper, when we're looking at, drum like redfish or large black drum, even those scales are pretty brutal on knife blades. And so anytime I'm using those, I like the flex of those blades a lot. I do like using what we call a nakiri. This is it's a vegetable knife, typically just used for chopping, slicing vegetables. Usually these are a little bit shorter. You'll most commonly find these in a 7-inch as opposed to chef's knives, which you will normally find in their 8-inch and 6-inch varieties. Speaking of 6-inch chef knives, you will notice that one type of knife is completely absent from my blocks and my roll. And it's a very popular knife, and that is something called a Santoku. Santoku, or known as the knife of three virtues, is a knife that people seem to love, and I have just never understood it. I've never gotten it. I have one that came in this case, and I keep it in the drawer and use the 6-inch chef knife. It's just what I prefer. I feel about Santokus the way that my dad felt about Universal car parts and Universal TV remotes in the early 90s. That they were just middle of the road enough to not work right for anything. And that is normally my experience with Santoku knives. But by all means, I would say if that's what you enjoy cutting with and what you cut the best with, and I'm not implying that you're wrong for doing that. It's just simply not what I prefer. I do have the serrated utility knives and a variety of paring knives. If I would take this out of my block set and put it in my knife bag, which I'm not quite willing to do, honestly, this is another type of paring knife known as a peeling knife, and I would probably, frankly, use this one a little bit more. This is great for coring apples, for peeling apples. You can tell with that curved shape, it really allows you to have a lot of control, as well as I really like the way I'm able to just work the point on that. This is a different type of boning knife. This is what we call a curved boning knife. You'll typically see the guys who are big into Texas brisket barbecue, they like these curved boning knives as opposed to the little thinner one that I have. So this is great for breaking down larger pieces of meat, briskets, things where you're typically taking off very large chunks of fat. So I use that thinner blade. I like it more for working around the bone and actually taking muscle off of the bone, as well as taking off things like tendons and silver skin. But if I was trimming predominantly fat and then some silver skin, this would definitely be the knife that I would prefer to grab there. And a lot of people think that this is a cheese knife, but this is actually a tomato knife. So These little points here are made to take the core out of a tomato. The holes are just simply there, kind of like scalloped edges would be there. It's simply there for less resistance. And then we do have the serrated blade that is slightly curved. And so this is great for slicing tomatoes, but you can also use this guy on citrus or any other small vegetables. So then looking at questions, I would probably ask a person before I give them advice as far as my opinion on what I think would be a good knife suggestion for them. A lot of that is going to be based on their understanding and their daily use, right? So someone who spends a lot of time researching or has spent a lot of time researching different steel types is very familiar and has a solid understanding of blades, how they work, the construction, the shape of them. When we're honing steel, right, we're taking the point that we have from time to time, and that gets a little bent and out of place. So when we hone that, we put that back into place. But when we sharpen knives, we're actually removing metal. So having a good understanding of what's going on with the blade, with not only each action that you're doing when it comes to honing, sharpening, and stropping, but also how you are cutting and what type of material you are cutting on and the type of material that you are actually slicing through. All of those are things that dramatically affect the life and the sharpness of your blade. So I would never tell you, if you tell me that you're interested in the Shun Premier or the Miyabi Mizu or their Birchwood series, one of those Bob Kramer knives from Zwilling are really nice. If you are looking to spend a few $100s on one chef knife, or you want to spend a couple of $1,000 on a really nice knife block set, I'm not telling you not to do that. What I am telling you is don't do that unless you have a good understanding of blades and how to take care of them, of maintenance. So look, if you know that you are the person who's like, hey, I wish that I could always hand wash my knives and keep them honed, but that's not me, that's not practical, that's not my life. I know that these knives are going to get put in the dishwasher from time to time. I know they're going to get left in the sink from time to time. Then what I would suggest is to buy this knife here. This knife is Mercer. This is their Millennia series. They also make like an Asian or Japanese style knife, as well as a Renaissance series, which is wood handles with rivets, more similar to the Wusthof Classics. And Mercer, as I mentioned earlier, I believe is made in Solingen, Germany, known as the City of Blades, in the same place where Hinkels are made, where Wustofs are made. They use excellent quality steel when compared to other German manufacturers. I will say I've noticed just little things like the polishing of the blade, not even necessarily a quality control issue. They just don't have as many labor hours spent doing little fine details of things. But you can find this knife on Amazon for $40 to $45, depending on what length and what style that you want. So this knife is the 9-inch knife. I use an 8-inch knife a lot, even a 10-inch knife a lot for chopping larger piles of herbs and things like that. But this has been a great knife. I have used this a ton here at the house. The sharpness of the blade, I have taken very good care of it, but the sharpness of the blade has held up really well. And so I would tell you, if you know that you aren't up to doing your part on the maintenance of taking care of the blade, then buy one of these $40 Mercer knives from Amazon and just buy a new knife every year, because I promise you, in 5 years, you will have gotten so much more value out of that than the shape that your $200 knife is going to be in after 5 years of you not taking care of it. So, and I wanted to show these two sets specifically because they are a good variance of different types of budgets and quantity of knives for what you get, but they are both from excellent manufacturers. So obviously, if you are in an apartment and you have a smaller kitchen and you don't have the counter space for a larger block, that is certainly something to consider. Obviously, as you can imagine, this set here did not come with 8 steak knives and did not come with all of the other extras that this larger block did. So, this one costs about a third of what this set did. So obviously, all things being relative to you and not me, I can't actually tell you what is the brand for you to purchase, what is the best set for you to purchase, or what is the best value for you to purchase. But what I can give you is my opinion on a couple of different options that you have as far as market tiers. Well guys, thanks so much for stopping by the channel today. I hope that answers a lot of the questions that you have had about knives. If you have questions that I didn't answer, please by all means, leave those below in the comment section and I will absolutely make sure to address and answer those for you. If you're not subscribed to us already, please subscribe to the channel, get those notifications when we release our weekly videos. As always, thanks for watching. I'd love to stick around, but I gotta go make a dinner on a yacht. Y'all have a great day.